Okay, so this is a video response to the Distributist. Kind of looking forward to this one, although it's not really aimed at me, the video. The video was called a Skeptic Challenge, and it was intended for bigger and brighter lights than my own. But unfortunately, I'm not. I'm responding for two reasons, really. One, because I'm not entirely convinced that the Distributist is going to get a response from any of the people that he aimed the video at, and two, because it's something that I would like to tackle. So here is a response. First thing I will say with regard to this is that the video is called a Skeptic Challenge. And yet in it, he talks about atheists. He's talking to atheists. He's talking about atheists. He's talking about atheism and the spread of atheism and the effect that that could have, etc., etc., etc. But then kind of vacillates between talking about atheists and skeptics throughout the video. These are not the same things. And although some people might conflate it in the way they label themselves or talk about themselves, they are different things. And I think that it's not helpful to keep changing between those two things. So I'm just going to talk about atheists as an atheist, as an anti-theist, as somebody who thinks that atheism is preferable in many ways to theism, and who would promote atheism from that perspective. Okay, so I want to respond to what was said here. Now, what I would usually do, my kind of modus operandi in these circumstances, as most of you will be aware by now, is to either show, to kind of try and find something within the original video that sums up what was said in that video, or to intersperse what I have to say with what the person I'm responding to has said. I've listened through several times to this, and I cannot really find a way to slice it up for a number of reasons. One is just simply the way that the video is laid out. Two is that there is some ambiguity to the video. I'm not entirely sure what it is that the Distributist is asking for, so that even if I make the clip, I'm still effectively going to have to interpret something which I find is quite ambiguous in terms of what he wants a response to. So in some ways it makes it more quote miney for me to give you a 30-second chunk and then respond to it, because I will be selecting the chunk to fit in with my reading of his video. So what I propose is this. The video is 6 minutes and 33 seconds long, so I advise you, I invite you, good viewer, to go and listen to the original, right, and to decide for yourself what he's asking for and to get a flavour for it. It's a good video, it's worth listening to. But what I will do now is to try and give you a quick interpretation of what he wants, and then to sort of give my response. To give a kind of summary of how I see the video, what he's saying is that effectively atheists are running around crowing about the victory that they've scored on YouTube, and that the world's going to hell in a handcart, effectively, metaphorically speaking, of course, because we're talking about atheists now. And then, well, what have atheists got to say about all of this, and how is their atheism going to replace what it's looking to replace? The theism, the religions, the big religions of this world. I suppose he's talking about Christianity because he seems to be focusing on the West. And this is where some of the ambiguity kicked in, because I couldn't really be sure whether he was talking in kinds of meta-ethics or rather in terms of applied ethics. It sounded at first he was talking more from a sort of philosophical meta-ethical perspective, and then more in terms of kind of applied ethics and the real situation of the world as the video got on. So I'm going to try and address all of those things in the order in which he talked about them. Watch the video. If you find your interpretation of the video is different, then I apologize to that. At least you know what it is that I'm addressing. So I'm addressing something, even if it's not what he was actually asking. So to tackle all these points in turn, then the first thing is this idea that atheists are crowing, that they've won. And what I can say to that is, because I've been on YouTube through all of this as I think as much a YouTube atheist as most people that would have been defined as YouTube atheists, especially in the early years up to 2012, 2008 to 2012 for me, when that's all that I talked about on YouTube, which was that we did win. But we didn't win through strength of argument, because that's not a win that can be achieved. Not with adults, not with people that have already developed their beliefs, and there's just too much at stake, I think, for adults in the main to change their position, as shown by the data in the British Social Attitude Survey, as I've shown several times, where cohorts keep their level of religiosity cohort on cohort. We have the data of that. The only victory that you can achieve is the military victory, really. I mean, the Catholic Church would be proud of what atheists have done on YouTube, really, because it's entirely in line with what Christianity and Islam has done, spreading the word of those proselytizing religions around the world. It's not going into different places and then using strength of philosophical argument to win. Some of that has taken place, but it's been through the sword. It's been the sword, not just in terms of converting people, but in terms of maintaining orthodoxy, which is critical, isn't it, to the success of religion, keeping people in lockstep and clamping down on them when they come out of line. And I think that's largely what atheists did on YouTube, not through threat that you're going to burn somebody at the stake for heterodox beliefs, but simply through weight of numbers and the bullying that effectively comes along with that. A Christian would make a video back in the day. If it got 500 views, 1,000 views, you could be sure that at least half of them were YouTube atheist viewers just looking to find something to criticize, because we just seem to have the strength of numbers on YouTube, perhaps because there's a lot of atheists in different places around the world where they are very much in the minority and they need a place, perhaps it doesn't apply to me, but they need a place where they're not going to, where they can speak their mind, they can be themselves, and they're not going to be clamped down on, they're not going to be frowned on, they're not going to become social pariahs. So I think that's kind of what went on here on YouTube. And I think in the real world, of course, again, in the real world, outside of YouTube, these kind of philosophical wins don't happen. The way that things change, because they're changing now in the United Kingdom and have been for several decades, it's a generational thing. It's each generation becoming less religious than the previous one. One of the statistics I've quoted many times recently is that despite the Church of England still being the official state religion of the United Kingdom, 18 to 21-year-olds, only 3% now regard themselves as Anglicans, associate with that within the United Kingdom. It's dying on its arse, quite frankly. It's dead, it just doesn't realise yet. It's like, I've been to people in car crashes before who, they're still talking to you, but they're effectively, they've got a couple of hours to live. Their internal organs are beyond repair. They're dead. They just don't know about it. And that's kind of the state that the Church of England is in the United Kingdom, I propose, now. And that's kind of the way that it's going. So I think that's the situation. Is that anything to crow about? It isn't for me, in terms of YouTube and atheism, because I enjoyed the debate. And I didn't really want that kind of bullying victory. I'd have rather had no victory. I'd rather just kept the debate going in many ways, because there's always fresh people, there's always younger, impressionable people who go and listen to those debates and get to hear both sides, and it might impact upon them, and they might make a more informed choice while they're still young enough to make that choice. You're too old to make that choice, Distributist, and so am I. We're set in our ways now. There's nothing that I could say. There's nothing that I could say that's going to turn you into an atheist. There's nothing that you can say that I haven't heard before. There's nothing that you can say to me that's going to make me go, oh, do you know what? I think I'm going to become a Catholic. It's just not going to happen, is it? We went on to say then about the world going downhill. This is really important now, you said, that this atheism, so the atheism takes over, it's replacing all religion. Let's say it's happening throughout society. And this is really critical now, because the world is going downhill. It sounded like typical kind of, almost like typical religious eschatological to end times talk I was getting from you there. Now is the critical time. Now we've got all the signs of the fucking end times, of the coming of Lord, and I just don't get that at all, actually. I don't think that today, now, this year is a particularly bad time. I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you're as old as I am. I'm 45. You look in your 30s or something like that. Maybe I'm doing you a favour, a little bit older. I don't know. But when I grew up, the Cold War was still on. They were pretty grim times. I remember the film, was it The Day After, and the series Threads. We're just getting to grips with the fact that this Cold War was still ongoing, and there didn't seem to be an end in sight, and that we're just starting to realise just how grim it would be if the old mutually assured destruction kicked in. Just what a grim, horrible scenario that would be. The world looked pretty grim then. It doesn't look anything like that grim to me now. So I don't know what it is that you're seeing. Maybe some of the grimness that you're seeing relates to your religion, right? Because you have certain moral positions as a result of your religious conviction, and you see them slipping away. You know, I don't know what your positions are on abortion, on homosexuality, on gay marriage, on women's rights, on all these kinds of things. But if they are traditional Christian positions, then I suppose you can see everything going to rack and ruin. But from my perspective, I don't see these as bad things. I don't see these things as endangering me or endangering the world in any way. I see these as social change that's generally for the better and that we're heading in the right direction. And even if they're not, I don't see them as particularly injurious things. They're not going to harm you. They're not going to have you turfed out of your house or your home blown up or your kids destitute on the street, starving or anything along those lines. So I just didn't get that. But they are important questions, and you asked the question in this kind of way that I found a little bit ambiguous, where at first it seemed to be heading in a kind of meta-ethical direction in terms of what are atheists going to replace it with? You know, we've had these arguments that God provides this kind of basis for objectivity, and if you get rid of God, then what's your basis for moral objectivism? And, you know, then it seemed to move on to something else. I mean, there's so many things that I could say with regard to this. The first would be, I suppose, that one claim that I know that most Christians that I've spoken to on this, they agree with me that even if morals are objective, and they believe that they are, that they're not party to what those morals are, right? You don't know what is objectively morally right and morally wrong. You're only guessing, picking up hints, and that is why Christianity, after 2,000 years, is still refining and altering what it regards as moral and immoral, because you're only getting shadows of this realm of objective moral facts, even if you claim that it exists. And of course, the other thing is moral conundrums typically they put in tension. They're a moral dilemma. They put in tension one moral fact against, or one moral problem against another, so that to deal with one, you're going to take away another. If you save this person's leg, this other person goes insane, or what have you. So how does that function? Which one rates above the other? And just having a sort of Ten Commandments style view of morality is neither use nor fucking ornament. That doesn't help you with moral dilemmas, because those situations tend not to be dilemmas. They tend to be too clear cut. It's not a case of thou shalt not kill. It's a case of, well, you know, how about this? I've got to kill this person, or 50,000 people are going to die of this virus, or this is going to happen, or this person's going to lose a leg or lose an eye, and I've got to decide which one happens. These are moral dilemmas, and none of this helps us. So we're still in the same boat. And with regard to that, and with regard to scripture, of course, I mean, one of the claims is that religion has scripture. It has this basis, and if you get rid of this, what do we replace it with? What does the atheist replace it with? And of course, the obvious retort, it's not one you won't have heard before, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth reiterating, is that it doesn't seem to work that way in religion. It doesn't actually seem, I've got to be frank, it doesn't seem as if religious people get their morality from scripture. It seems to me that religious people interpret scripture on the basis of their morality, because the interpretation of scripture seems to change all the time. It seems to blow with the wind, as the winds of moral thinking, so it's got to be coming from somewhere else, hasn't it? It's got to be coming from somewhere else other than scripture for you to be able to interpret scripture and pick out those bits of scripture you go, well, that bit sounds okay, so this bit we go by. That bit, don't like the sound of what's happening to the Midianites, or don't like some of that Leviticus stuff. We're going to get rid of. We're not going to concern ourselves with those bits. Obviously, they need to be interpreted in an allegorical way. But these other bits we'll take literally. Where does that ability to do that come from? And one of the things that I recall, it's not the only person I've heard say this, but I've heard William Lane Craig talk about this, is that what he's saying, as I understand it, is that from his perspective, our sense of morality isn't rooted in scripture, it's innate. but it's innate and given by God, that this is the great fucking gift that God has given us, which is this sense of morality. He's given us this moral sense and an empathetic sense, which I suppose is tied to it, that allows us, and this is how William Lane Craig explains the fact that even atheists can be moral. He says this quite openly. Atheists can be very moral people too. But what is this based on? It's based upon this innate moral sense. And so, of course, atheists would have this regardless of whether or not they believe in God. So this wouldn't be a concern from your perspective, because it doesn't require the religion. It doesn't require the scripture. It exists. Everybody in the world could be atheists. God exists still. You were right, after all. God exists. We're all atheists, but we've still got this innate sense. And I'm kind of happy with that, because it isn't far from my position, because I believe that we still have that innate sense. I just don't think it's God-given. I think that we've evolved this moral sense as a way of controlling our social environment. Other apes have a moral sense. They have simpler social environments. They have simpler moral senses. We've got a much more complicated social environment. It's in our selfish interest to control that social environment, and our sense of morality and justice and right and wrong is our way of influencing the behaviour of others to make the behaviour of others more amenable to ourselves. It's better behaviour that's more in our interest than the genes that code for that behaviour. So effectively, I've got the evolutionary version of what William Lane Craig attributes to God. Either way, we seem to have this thing, and that exists whether we believe in God or not. And so eventually in your video, you seem to be going down the line of how is this all going to pan out? You know, we're going from sort of meta-ethics, and we're veering into applied ethics, and sort of how is this going to work out? I can only say it's already working out like that, okay? In the United Kingdom, again, another statistic I've quoted numerous times recently for one reason or another, only 32% of people in the United Kingdom now say that they, when asked, say that they believe in God. Only 55% of those who identify as Christians in the United Kingdom now say they believe in God. And yet we still miraculously seem to be able to have moral discussions, because most of the political discussions we have, in one sense or another, are moral discussions. And whether or not, the funny thing is that even if we can ground our meta-ethics in something, and in terms of objectivity, I've never been satisfied that the God believers can do it any more than the atheists, because to me the existence of an omniscient, omnipotent deity in no way objectifies the moral commands that he or she issues. It doesn't work for me, that. So it never works for me under any circumstances anyway. But aside from all of that, we can still have these moral discussions, this applied morality, this applied ethics, this business that we take part in on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, most of the time, let's be honest, for the average person, not you or I that are holding these discussions, because you're not a typical theist, you're not a typical Christian, I'm not a typical atheist. If we were, we wouldn't be doing this online. For most of them, they're quite happy. They might discuss this in school, and I know this because my wife teaches morality and ethics in school, or has done in the past, is that these things will be discussed. What is our morality based on? But beyond that, a lot of people will go through life never really thinking about that again. The only realm of ethics that they will deal in will be applied ethics. We'll be talking about actual moral situations that have some traction in real life. What is the right thing for us to do? What is the wrong thing for us to do? Is it okay? Is abortion okay? How many weeks down the line should we allow it? What circumstances should we allow it in? They don't start saying, oh, fucking hell, but is there a basis for my meta-ethics here? Do I need some objectivity? If everything is subjective, then what am I to say if Adolf Hitler comes in front of me? Blah, 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 blah. Right? They never go down those lines. So if your concern is that society isn't going to function unless we can find some philosophical, I think this is a Sam Harris term, philosophical bedrock for morality, I don't think it's going to make the damnedest bit of difference. That only matters to philosophers. Everybody else is just going to get on with it. right? They're just going to carry on doing it in just the same way as when you tell me you find pasta really, really tasty. You absolutely love pasta. You're not racked with doubt over whether there's there must be some objectivity to the experience of taste and smell. Otherwise, what am I doing announcing this, right? It just doesn't even enter in to your thinking, does it? We can still have those discussions regardless of how objective or subjective our sense of taste and smell is, regardless of whether they're grounded in something evolutionary in terms of the purposes that they serve, in terms of stopping us eating food that's dangerous to us, in terms of helping us pick out calorific rich foods that are good for us. None of that needs to enter into our thinking. So I'm not even sure what your concern is there. Well, listen, I hope you've watched this video, Distributist. I hope you found it interesting. Maybe if this doesn't answer your concerns, maybe it will at least clarify the misunderstanding that's taking place with regard to this. Okay, I'd be interested to hear from your thoughts. No, I'd actually be interested to hear from you on your thoughts on this response. I'd also be interested to know what anybody else thinks about this. Thank you for listening and watching. Bye for now.